Hi, I'm Chris Wilson. Since I started doing this whole YouTube thing, I've received a lot of emails asking about the feasibility of developers releasing classic versions of their online RPGs. I promised a few people I'd record a video with my perspective on the topic, based on my own experience developing and running an online RPG. People often think that releasing a classic server is as simple as checking out an old version of the game from version control and just putting it online. In reality, getting an old build running is the easy part, making it secure, compatible, supportable, and legally compliant as a modern live service is the hard part. So what do I mean when I refer to a classic release of an online game? Well, imagine you've been running a game for many years, and over the course of that time, the game has changed. You've released expansions, you've rebalanced everything many times, you've updated the graphics engine, you've completely disabled or changed features that were in the base game. And the current version of the game plays quite differently to how the original did back in the day. Players are missing the original version. They petition you to re-release the old one as a classic server so they can get a nostalgia fix, or even potentially make this version the dominant way they play the game. Now, this could be attractive for business reasons. Not only does it make players happier, but it's potentially a nice value add if you currently charge them a monthly subscription. You've already incurred the costs of developing the old version of the game, so maybe the strategy lets you essentially have two games for the price of one. Both World of Warcraft and RuneScape have gone through this process, and they've been quite successful with it. Well, getting to that outcome is a whole lot of work, and today I'm going to break down to you what could be involved. The first question we need to answer is which version of your game you want to release on the classic server. Sometimes it's obvious. For example, for games that have a traditional release schedule, you might pick the first fully released version of the original game after early stability and bug fix patches were deployed, but before significant balance changes were done. But for more live servicey games that evolved over time without necessarily having paid expansion releases, the decision of which version to use might be more difficult. I suspect if you ask, say, Warframe players what they view to be the classic version of Warframe, they'd all have different answers, which may be swayed by the nostalgia of when they personally started playing. So once you've decided which version you're releasing, how do you actually get that version of the game? Well, you do it through the magic of version control. Developers in the audience will notice that this explanation I'm giving is an oversimplification to the point of absurdity, but basically a version control system is a repository where developers check in their work. It not only maintains the current version of every game file for people to work on, but also all past versions. It's like a permanent snapshot of every moment of a game's development history. And game developers have been using this as a commonplace tool since the late 90s, so pretty much every currently running online game probably has its full version history available. Here's a terrible visual representation of this. The raw source files are maintained for every version of the game, all the way back to the start. You can scroll through time to find the exact version you want to get access to. Note that in reality there are probably multiple repositories, branches, tags, and sometimes complex external binary file stores, but we're keeping things super simple here. So in this hypothetical example, we go to our version repository, select the 1.0 launch version of the game, and ask it to check out that version. A few minutes, or hours later, we have all the source materials of the game on our computer ready to go. It's like we were back there on the day. But before we can try it out, we need to get the game to build. This means putting it through the process that turns it from a pile of source code and art assets into a packaged game that we can install and run on the computer. This may be harder than it sounds for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's possible that your build scripts might not have been stored in the version control repository alongside the game. If you made this mistake, then good luck recreating them. Secondly, the operating system and environment you're using now in 2026 may be entirely different than what was commonplace back in 2004 or whenever this version is from. What works just fine on Windows XP might not be exactly the same on Windows 11. You might need to find old versions of your compiler, libraries, database, runtimes, art tools, potentially even the operating system itself, all to get the game to build. But you can start the slow process of getting all of this to work with your modern toolchain. Eventually, with some work, you'll get it to build and run, and then you'll have an exact version of your game from the past running on your modern computer. Congratulations. Once you're at this stage, you have an old version of your game playable, complete with whatever server backend and tooling existed back then. And as this was a version you had live and had released at the time, it would theoretically work if you deployed it onto some servers on the internet and gave the download link out to your players. But that would be a big mistake. This old version of the game you got running is really far from being actually releasable. For a start, while players love the idea of playing an old prehistoric version of the game, they're probably viewing what that version was like through pretty heavy rose-tinted glasses. You've applied a decade of quality of life improvements to the game since then, and those are all going to be absent. Now, while I'm not suggesting that you go through and re-implement all of those features, because that undermines the purpose of the classic version, you're going to have to at least evaluate which changes the important ones are to players and the ones they're going to refuse to live without. Without a doubt, the old version of the game you've just built is going to contain bugs that you've actually fixed since then. All of these bugs are going to be back, and fixing them is sometimes not as simple as just applying the same fix as before, because the exact order of changes to the code will differ in the two timelines. Some of these bugs will be exploitable by players, so you better hope you fix them all fully, because people are going to try to profit from them on day one. Speaking of profiting from exploits, all of your anti-bot and hack detection tools will be reset back to the Stone Age, whatever you had built for your initial release. These are unlikely to be able to deal with the toolkit of modern automation that your players will throw at this version of the game. After all, they've been working on improving this for like 10 or 15 years, so you need to backport all of that stuff across as well. But it's not just your contemporary anti-bot tools that need to be compatible, but every single piece of your customer support and operational tooling. After all, your customer support staff are going to need to immediately start fixing problems with accounts and purchases, and they will need the modern tools that they're trained on and able to use efficiently for this. Don't forget that all of your game activity and retention reporting tools need to be updated as well. Your stakeholders are going to want to know how well the classic version is doing in just as much detail as you provide for the modern version. Speaking of tooling integration, there's also the issue that the old version just won't be compatible with your modern notion of what a player account even is. In order to have it tied into the same billing system, you'll need to integrate it with your current account system, and that involves a decade of modernization to any code that touches player accounts, and that has to be done carefully with a capital C. But the nightmare doesn't end there. In 2018, the European Union introduced the GDPR, an extensive data protection framework that requires significant legal compliance work on your end. Your pre-2018 game almost certainly won't be compliant, and it must be. And that's just the start of the regulation compliance quest you're going to be going on. Every single aspect of user-generated content, child safety, loot box disclosure, and whatever else people are regulating will need to get modernized in this classic version of the game. If you somehow duplicate all of this work into the classic version, then you have to keep doing it every time the modern version changes. You essentially have two versions that you have to update side by side, and this is very hard to sustain in practice. As you can see, for this classic version, you want the really old version of the game content, but you don't want the really old version of the game code and infrastructure, as you have to fully update that to the modern one anyway. So, rather than going back in time and grabbing the old snapshot of everything, you probably need to grab just the classic game content and port it across to a modern copy of the game engine and infrastructure. This means that all of your hard work on bug fixes, bot detection, legal compliance, and operational tools can be immediately leveraged. With one game backend running two different versions of the game, it's more trivial for infrastructure improvements made to the modern game to benefit the classic one immediately. So this all becomes a content porting exercise, trying to get the old art, gameplay, balance, quests, and so on to work with a modern engine as faithfully as possible. Depending on how you have architected your game, this could be a whole lot of work. You may have to emulate old rendering behavior or even old gameplay behavior to make it feel like it used to. But in order to be able to practically run this classic game as a serious ongoing service rather than just a toy, it's the best path for most studios. Overall, I'd only recommend doing this whole process and creating a classic server for your game if you feel there's an extremely strong business case for it. One of the concerns is that a lot of players who enjoyed the early days of the game rather than the current version have long left, and it's a really expensive and difficult marketing proposition to get them all back to play the classic version. Strategically, it has worked out really well for Blizzard and Jagex with their classic servers, but then World of Warcraft and RuneScape are two incredibly popular, enduring games with passionate communities. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and consider subscribing. Thanks very much, and see you next time.